Just a really quick one. Over 83% of people who've watched my videos in the last 28 days haven't been subscribed to the channel. So if you could do me a favour and hit that subscribe button, that would really help get my videos out there to a wider audience. Thank you. In today's video, we'll be travelling back to the 14th of September 1985, where in Luton, England, 26-year-old Avril Dunn was getting ready to visit her local pub, the Heron. What initially started as a typical Saturday night would eventually turn into a murder mystery that would take nearly 15 years to solve. Although, unbeknownst to the police and public alike, the killer had revealed himself to millions, albeit briefly. Hello, and welcome to the channel. Avril Dunn was born on the 11th of March 1959 in Glasgow, Scotland. At the age of 11, her family decided to move to England, settling in Luton. Little is known about Avril's upbringing and family background, but we do know she had at least one sister who lived in America at the time this story takes place. By 1980, Avril married a man named Paul Dunn, who was working as a postman. During this time, Avril had suffered with anorexia nervosa, and by 1982, her battle with the illness had reached a tipping point where she would end up being hospitalised due to her frail condition. While she would eventually be discharged, her marriage to Paul was allegedly said to be strained throughout, and by 1983, the pair's relationship had broken down, resulting in their separation. It's unknown whether the couple pursued formal divorce proceedings, but it wouldn't be a stretch to assume that this was the case. Following their separation, Avril moved in with her cousin David, who by 1985 was residing in Gooseberry Hill, Luton. This living arrangement seemed to suit them both, with the two getting on well with each other. Avril was said to be someone who yearned for connection and would often find comfort in small routines and conversation with those she was comfortable with. An example of Avril's desire to connect would be with a family that she befriended at Five Springs Tower Block, located on the Marsh Farm estate. She would often visit the family to collect videotapes to watch, usually several times a week. The family suspected that Avril often made excuses to visit, using the videotapes as a reason to come around, so that she could talk and spend time with them, even if it was only for a minute or so. As I mentioned earlier, Avril had a sister who lived in America, and in early 1985, Avril travelled to America with her parents to visit and stay with her sister. It was arguably a highlight for Avril, who rarely travelled. Avril was said to have followed a routine that included frequent visits to the Heron pub, where it was said she would visit 3 times per week. She often was seen playing darts with the locals and was also known by the pub's landlord, Des Perry. Though she was familiar to the regulars, they would later admit that they didn't truly know her. She kept her personal life private and rarely opened up, even to those she saw often. Despite this emotional distance, she left a positive impression. Locals described Avril as a lovely, quiet girl, soft-spoken and polite. She was someone who sought out attention, but her presence was clearly noticed positively by those who interacted with her. At around 7:30 PM on the 14th of September 1985, Avril would tell her cousin David that she was going out to the Heron pub. Little did anyone know, this night would turn out to be her last visit. After leaving home by foot, Avril's route took her past Spinney Wood, along Henge Way, and toward the tower blocks of the Marsh Farm estate. For context, Spinney Wood is a small, densely wooded area nestled within the Marsh Farm estate. It's not a formal park with signage or facilities, but rather a patch of natural woodland that locals refer to simply as the Spinney. The area had unfortunately been the location of 2 recent sex attacks. Naturally, Avril was wary of this, and as such, she would intentionally walk around the Spinney's periphery. On this particular evening, Avril's journey was no different. Around 8 PM, She stopped by Five Springs Tower Block to collect videos from the family she'd befriended, but shortly after, she returned to ask them to hold on to the tapes as she was going to the pub and wasn't sure about taking them with her. They accepted, and Avril handed back the tapes before leaving again for the Heron. From there, Avril walked past a row of locked garages, then through the underpass at Ligerton Drive, eventually arriving at the Heron at around 8:30 p.m. Shortly after arriving, several locals would spot her at the pool table, quietly keeping to herself. At around 8:45 p.m, a woman entered the ladies' toilet where she found Avril crying to herself. Concerned, she asked if Avril had had a row with her boyfriend. Avril said no, and the woman offered Avril a tissue and reassured her, saying, "He's not worth it." Avril then asked if the woman watched videos, to which the woman said that she didn't. The woman asked again, "Was it your husband?" Avril responded softly, "I was married, but I'm not anymore." The conversation seemingly ended there. Nearly an hour later, at 9:45 p.m, Avril was seen speaking with two men at the bar. While making small talk, she told the men that she had gone jogging. One of the men joked that she shouldn't lose more weight, suggesting she drink half a dozen Guinnesses a day to help her gain weight. The other man then offered to buy her a drink, a Malibu and lemonade. Soon after, Avril was seen playing darts with one of the men, and Des King, another pub regular, kept score of their game. By 10:30 p.m, Avril had apparently decided that it was time to go home and said her goodbyes. By 7:30 a.m. the next morning, Sunday the 15th of September, a dog walker was walking through a wooded pocket of spinny wood where he would tragically stumble across the lifeless body of Avril Dunn. She was mere minutes from her home. As the news broke of Avril's demise, police knew that they had a task on their hands to figure out Avril's movements after leaving the Heron, and immediately got to work with this task. Investigators would quickly cordon off the area to preserve the crime scene and examined Avril's body to determine what happened to her. They noted that the injuries inflicted upon Avril were severe. She had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, face, neck and chest, consistent with stamping. It was also noted that signs of asphyxiation had occurred, but it was likely that this was not what killed Avril, but likely rendered her unconscious. Shockingly, some of the wounds on her body had clearly been inflicted after she had died, suggesting a sustained and highly emotional attack. There were also signs that sexual violence had occurred. It was apparent that whoever had done this to Avril had been in a fit of rage. Given that Avril weighed just 5.5 stone and stood at only 4 foot 10 inches tall at the time of her death, it was clear that she stood no chance against her attacker. Investigators would conduct a sweep of the surrounding area, hoping to find more clues. This would provide some success, as within 3 days a shed in Sundon Park drew their attention. Inside, investigators found items which were quickly identified as belonging to Avril, including underwear and other personal items of hers. A bone-handled knife was also recovered, and its blade bore markings consistent with injuries found on Avril's body. Upon further testing, it was revealed that traces of semen were found on Avril's underwear. While this would almost certainly be the piece of a puzzle needed to solve a case quickly, forensic science in 1985 was limited. The kind of forensic technology we're used to these days didn't exist at the time and was still around a decade away. Still, this didn't stop investigators from cataloguing and storing the evidence, hoping that one day it could be re-examined. In addition to this, bitumen was found on Avril's clothing. Bitumen, for those who don't know, is a black sticky substance typically used in roofing, road surfacing and waterproofing. These stains were specifically found on Avril's shirt and skirt. While it wasn't enough to identify the killer, it was clear that the person responsible would have had regular exposure to the substance, and as such, it allowed investigators to narrow down their list of potential suspects. In an attempt to retrace Avril's last known steps, police carried out interviews with her family and patrons at the Heron pub. many of whom recalled seeing her that night. Unfortunately, despite the hard work investigators had carried out to date, they were no closer to making an arrest, leading them to reach out to the BBC to make an appeal to the general public for help. In March 1986, Avril's murder featured on Crime Watch UK, which was a BBC television programme that aired from 1984 to 2017. The show was dedicated to reconstructing unsolved crimes and appealing to the public for information that could help lead to arrests. Through dramatic reenactments and police interviews, it helped solve hundreds of cases by encouraging viewer call-ins and nationwide tip-offs. Essentially, it was our version of America's Most Wanted. Using the information that police had gathered, a detailed reconstruction was shown to the public. Along with the events I've already described, pub regular Des King and landlord Des Perry also made short statements. King would say, quote, "I don't think any of us knew her at all. Basically, I think most of us felt sorry for her, in the sense that she always seemed to be alone. We always treated her as one of the lads. We used to pull her leg, play darts with her, but she never spoke about things in general." While Perry would confirm the time she left the pub that night, the manner of her departure did not fit with her usual pattern. He would say, quote, "She usually stayed here at 11 o'clock on Saturday nights and walked home with 3 or 4 guys she knew. But that night we saw her missing at 10:30. The reconstruction also revealed that 2 customers who saw a woman matching Avril's description left the pub with a tall, fair-haired man. This man was seen walking toward a light-coloured car, possibly an Opel Manta, fitted with a spoiler and sports tyres. A second couple seated outside the pub may have witnessed the driver switch on the car's headlights and remain there, talking with someone. Detective Superintendent Mel Thompson, who was leading the investigation at the time, made a direct appeal for this couple to come forward, but it's unlikely that they ever did. Half a mile away, another witness spotted a white car, likely a Vauxhall Chevette, performing an erratic U-turn. The driver appeared flustered and followed the witness briefly before turning off into the Marsh Farm tower blocks. Following the reconstruction, Crime Watch presenter Nick Ross and Detective Thompson showed Avril's bitumen-covered clothing to the cameras. Incredibly, the 2 of them were handling and fiddling with the evidence with their bare hands. If the clothing was a replica of the actual evidence, well, they didn't make that clear at the time. When I saw this for the first time, my jaw genuinely dropped. I don't think I need to tell you why, but I wasn't surprised, given the general understanding of forensic evidence at this point in time. After showing the evidence, a video fit of a man believed to be a person of interest was shown to viewers. He was described as being between 20 to 24, 6 foot to 6 foot 2 inches, medium build, light collar-length hair brushed to the right, blue eyes, clean shaven, and wearing a light-coloured top and darker trousers. Despite the strength of the appeal and the national coverage it garnered, nothing seemingly came from the appeal. No one came forward who could shed any more light on the couple witnessed getting into a white car, and no new leads were obtained that could be followed. Unfortunately, it appeared as though Avril's murder was doomed to become another cold case. But as time went on, the science would begin to catch up, reigniting the case once more. In 1987, a relatively new forensic technique achieved something never seen before. Between 1983 and 1986, the nation was gripped over the unsolved murders of teenagers Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth respectively. While police had a suspect in custody, teenager Richard Buckland, who had confessed to Linda Mann's murder, refused to accept any involvement in the murder of Dawn Ashworth. Frustrated by this, they were determined to find a way to link Buckland to both girls' murders, as they were convinced the two were connected. Eventually, they would turn to British geneticist Alec Jeffreys, who in 1984 created a new way to identify individuals by analysing unique patterns in their DNA, which would otherwise be known as DNA fingerprinting. Jeffries would agree to test the DNA evidence available, although he was quick to manage the expectations of the investigators, as this was the first time this technique had been used to find a killer. When Alec Jeffries analysed the results, he found that the DNA evidence did indeed demonstrate that the same person was responsible for the deaths of Linda and Dawn. There was, however, one problem. Richard Buckland wasn't the killer. After the shocking news broke, it was later found that Buckland had falsely confessed to murdering Linda Mann. He would become the first person ever to be exonerated thanks to DNA profiling. Investigators would eventually identify Colin Pitchfork as the man responsible, using the same technique to exonerate Richard Buckland. Pitchfork eventually pleaded guilty to both crimes, becoming the first person in the world to be convicted using DNA evidence. Despite the landmark moment, DNA fingerprinting in the 1980s remained fragile. In the Pitchfork case, the method required large, pristine samples, untouched and intact. That wasn't the case in Avril Dunn's murder. While there was DNA evidence, the forensic tools of the day couldn't determine with absolute certainty who it belonged to. That was until the 1990s, when a new technique known as polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, was developed. This new technique enabled scientists to amplify tiny or degraded DNA fragments, which in turn gave a new lease of life to previously cold cases. As time went on, cold cases would eventually be reopened and stored evidence retested. Naturally, Avril Dunn's case would be revisited in 1998. For the person responsible, it was now a matter of time before he faced justice. On the 14th of September 1998, precisely 13 years to the day of Avril's murder, a huge breakthrough in the investigation was made when the forensic evidence was positively matched. The DNA belonged to Duncan Jackson, a man who had been 23 years old at the time the crime took place. There was absolutely no doubt that the DNA was his, as the odds of it not belonging to him were a staggering 1 in a billion. At the time of his arrest, Jackson was a married father of 4 children and was still living in Luton. At the time of Avril's murder, Jackson was working as a roofer, which further linked him to the crime, given the connection to the occupation and the bitumen found on Avril's clothing. It also emerged that Jackson and Avril were in fact known to each other. Both frequented the Heron pub, where they often played darts together. On the night Avril was last seen alive, Jackson was the man who bought her a Malibu and lemonade, before suggesting the pair play darts together, which was the same game that Des King kept score of. If you recall, this sequence of events had actually been highlighted during the 1986 Crime Watch reconstruction. But what wasn't apparent was that Duncan Jackson had actually portrayed himself in the reconstruction. You heard that right. Jackson was seen by millions, reliving Avril Dunn's last known movements all over again. While it isn't confirmed if he volunteered to play himself, or if the police put him up to it, he was originally suspected of being involved during the initial investigation. However, as we've previously learned, there was simply not enough evidence to charge Jackson at the time. Returning to 1998, Duncan Jackson was now in police custody. He would deny killing Avril, arguing that despite leaving the Heron pub at the same time as Avril, he told interrogators that he had gone straight home. He would claim that his wife would be able to verify this, thus providing an alibi. The authorities, however, were unconvinced, and the DNA evidence was telling them a completely different story. When police checked Duncan Jackson's criminal record, they found that he had no prior convictions for violence. Although, his record wasn't squeaky clean, as he did hold convictions for theft and burglary. That being said, when authorities spoke with his wife later on, she would go on to confirm that domestic abuse had occurred in their household, specifically using violence towards her. Duncan Jackson would go on trial at Reading Crown Court at the beginning of January 2000. He would continue to deny killing Avril, but would concede that the semen found on her clothing came from him. However, he would say that its presence was likely down to a consensual sexual interaction that took place just a few nights before her murder. The prosecution, led by Christopher Houghton QC, argued that Jackson had lured Avril to a shed in Sundon, where personal items would later be found. They argued that Jackson had likely flown into a violent rage, with Houghton saying, quote, "Something went wrong in that shed and Mr. Jackson attacked her. His attack was ferocious and he killed her." He speculated that Jackson attacked Avril, possibly after she rebuffed Jackson's sexual advances, or perhaps after she taunted him. But this was only ever a theory, as Jackson himself never offered a motive and would continue to assert his innocence. 3 weeks later, after hearing both sides of the argument, the jury would be sent away to decide Duncan Jackson's fate. They would eventually return a 10-2 majority verdict. Duncan Jackson was guilty for the murder of Avril Dunn. Presiding over the case, Mr. Justice Garland remarked, "I would like to pay a tribute to the remarkable forensic research that went into this case and the quite staggering DNA forecast." On the 27th of January 2000, Duncan Jackson was sentenced to life imprisonment. At the time, no minimum term was initially set, but was still being decided. 4 days later, on the 31st of January 2000, in his sentencing report, Garland wrote the following: "Although it was a particularly brutal murder, the circumstances were not so exceptional as to warrant a recommendation. The Crown were unable to suggest a motive for the killing. The injuries were very severe and some were post-mortem. The defendant did not have any previous convictions for violence, although according to his wife, he had used violence towards her. I am not inclined to depart from the median tariff of 15 years. On the 3rd of February 2000, Lord Bingham Chief Justice added, "I do not think the lapse of time between the offence and the conviction has very much bearing on the appropriate punitive term, which should in my view be 14 to 15 years. Finally, on the 19th of December 2001, Jackson was officially informed by the Home Secretary, then David Blunkett, on behalf of the Home Office, that his tariff had been set at 15 years. Prior to his minimum term being formalised, Jackson had submitted an appeal to his conviction in January 2001, but this was ultimately denied. Years later, under Schedule 22, Paragraph 3 of the Criminal Justice Act 2003, Jackson sought to have his minimum term formally reviewed by the High Court, hoping to see his 15-year minimum term reduced. It was argued that his progress in prison since his conviction had been exceptional. While the court acknowledged Jackson's conduct and achievements were, quote, commendable and better than average, they ruled this did not meet the threshold of exceptional progress. Therefore, on the 6th of July 2011, the original 15-year minimum term was upheld. However, since his failed appeal in 2011, Duncan Jackson's tariff likely expired around 2015. As of now, there is no public record confirming whether he remains in prison or has been released. The murder of Avril Dunn is a case that reminds us how justice can be delayed, but ultimately not denied. Her story, once thought to be destined for the cold case shelves, would eventually be solved, thanks to the persistence of investigators and the evolution of DNA technology. It gives hope to others that further advancements in forensic technology may one day provide closure for others still searching for answers. As for Duncan Jackson, his conviction brought closure to a case that had haunted Luton for nearly 15 years. His role in the Crime Watch reconstruction, portraying himself in a televised reenactment of Avril's last night, remains an unsettling footnote in British true crime history. In fact, this isn't even the first time I've covered a case where the killer played themselves in a reconstruction. In my video regarding the murder of Rachel McLean, which I've linked in the description. Her boyfriend at the time, John Tanner, also played himself in a televised reconstruction concerning her disappearance, only to later be convicted of her murder. Whether Jackson volunteered or was prompted to appear in the reconstruction by police, it's moments like these that raise questions about proximity, guilt, and the psychology of killers who opt to remain close to their crimes. I, for one, will never be able to wrap my head around it. If you were wondering about the Heron pub, it's unfortunately no longer there. The place that once welcomed locals looking to meet up with friends or simply have a moment to themselves has since closed down and is now a care home. Finally, Alec Jeffries, the man responsible for the worldwide use of DNA profiling, was given a knighthood for his services to genetics and to science and technology in 1994. That's Sir Alec Jeffries to us now. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please give this video a like, and if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your continued support is invaluable to the growth of the channel, and I'm very grateful to each and every one of you. If you have thoughts related to this case, or were local to Luton at the time, let me know in the comments below. I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Until next time, take care and goodbye. For now.